introduce yourself, the organization that you represent, and perhaps just a brief overview of the services that you provide or what your role is in the organization, just for some context as we move through today's discussion items on the agenda. Thank you so much. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and ask for Elizabeth Lewis to go ahead and lead us off here with introductions.
Hi, excuse me. Good morning. I'm the Corporate Advancement Officer for Fellowship Square, which is senior living communities across the state of Arizona. We have one in Tucson. We have 4 in Maricopa County and 1 in Cottonwood. We're actually the largest provider of senior living in the state of Arizona. Most of our residents are in the moderate to low income economic demographic, and I'm happy to be here. This is my first year with PAG, so very excited.
Great. Well, glad to have you. Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate you being here this morning. All right. The next person I see is Anna. Anna, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anna Casillas, and I work for Sunvan of Tucson. We transport the elderly and the disabled to anywhere in the area, just like the city service, the same, oh my gosh, 1/4 mile outside of the city service is what we transport. I am the dispatch supervisor here.
Great, Anna. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here this morning.
Thank you.
And then Joanna. Not sure if Joanna can hear me. Hi.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can. Go ahead.
Awesome. So this is Joanna, and I'm here with my colleague Sherry, and we're with Coyote Task Force. Programs include Cafe 54 and Our Place Clubhouse, and we provide all sorts of skills training and employment services to adults in mental health recovery.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Joanna. Good morning, Sherry. Sherry, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
We are sharing a headset and microphone today, so I can introduce Sherry.
Okay.
She's our accountant, and Sherry's, I think, excited to be here today as well.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, Sherry. All right. And then Steve Knapp.
Good morning. My name is Steve Knapp. I'm the operations manager for Hope Inc. And we are a behavioral health agency providing adults with various mental health issues, training, counseling, as well as opiate outreach and reentry programs for criminal justice and treatment participants.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate you being here. Rhett Crowninshield.
Hi, Janine.
Hi, Rhett.
Rhett Crowninshield, City of Tucson. I'm the transit administrator for the city and oversee our transit services, SunTran, Sunvan, Sunlink, Sun On Demand. I work with the FTA, etc. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your investment of time. I'm Carmen Johnson.
Good morning. I'm Carmen Johnson from Catholic Community Services. I am an associate director for the residential program. We support adults with intellectual disabilities in community-based homes. We also operate a very healthy vocational program for the deaf, deafblind, and adults with intellectual disabilities.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I think that concludes all of the introductions. If anyone joins us here just in a few minutes, we'll do our best to circle back and allow them an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. So thank you everyone for participating in our introductions this morning. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide for today's meeting. And this is just a helpful reminder regarding the in-kind form. So regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and course participants. PAG collects that data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. So if you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know now, because that would be helpful for us to ensure that we don't incorporate those hours into our calculations. So the time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and the meeting materials. And of course, at the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. So time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So that concludes our element with regard to in-kind form. But just as a reminder, again, if you are paid through federal dollars, now would be a great time to share that. And you can share that verbally, or you can send me an email stating that your position's paid with federal dollars, so we don't calculate it in our in-kind. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so we are going to go ahead and move to the next slide, which is the first topic of our agenda today, which is regional coordination goals. So if you had an opportunity or have had an opportunity to review the coordinated plan, which is on the PAG website, it is the fiscal year 2023 through 2026 PAG Public Transit Human Services Coordination Transportation Plan. You will notice that there's a wide variety of regional coordination goals that are outlined. And on the slide that you see before you, kind of speaks to a number of those particular coordination goals. So as many of you know, next year we will enter into a grant cycle for FTA Section 5310 cycle. So our FTA Section 5310 grant cycle. And with that, it's always good to be mindful of what the regional coordination goals are and what is spoken to in the coordinated plan, because everything that you might be applying for needs to be commensurate with or aligned with the coordinated plan. So with that being said, we're going to just kind of open up the floor a little bit to have a discussion about these goals and to allow for you to have an opportunity to ask questions, give some thought about how you might work towards planning for any particular coordination goals, but especially anything that you might be potentially applying for in the next grant cycle. So with that being said, when we look at the regional coordination goals, some of the things that are looked at are the ability to serve new clients or new riders, depending on if you are a client-based or a client-centric transportation service provider, or if your transportation service is more open to the general public. In either space, serve new riders or new clients, depending on how you characterize that. And then, of course, we're always looking for how we might be able to expand to new service areas. And so you might recall in the past, we did some questions around what is your service area and what are those boundaries, so that we could do some boundary maps. So we do have a lot of great information from those discussions that have taken place over the last few years. So if you need some insights or some help or some guidance on what those service area boundaries look like and where there might be an opportunity to expand into new service areas or to coordinate with other organizations who are serving in that area, we really have a great opportunity to take a look at that. And so that would be something that we might want to talk through together. So with that, most of you who have participated in the working group meetings in the past and have applied for funding in the past, you actually have a provider profile listed at the back of the coordinated plan. And for those that might be considering applying for funding in the future and are relatively new to the working group, establishing a provider profile and having it incorporated into the coordinated plan will be something that you'll be working on over the next several months as we prepare for the future grant cycles. So if you haven't looked at those provider profiles, that'd be a good reminder to do so. But I bring that up because of the expanded service hours, as well as the new service areas potential, because your provider profile typically speaks not only to the clients that you serve, It speaks to the service areas that you provide service in, and of course, it shapes what your service hours are. So all of those things, if there are opportunities for you to expand or to grow or to offer new services, which is the next bullet point, those are definitely some things you would want to have updated in your provider profile, but also things to be planning around as we lean into preparing more fully for the next grant cycle. So of course, with that comes a variety of other things to prepare well for. And so that is the staffing and operational costs to bring any of those services to fruition. And of course, any associated maintenance costs would need to be evaluated to ensure you have adequate funding to sustain the project. And then, of course, taking a look at the regional gaps as they're outlined in the coordinated plan to be able to answer the question for yourself and, of course, for a future grant application is to what extent does this particular coordination goal help to address a regional gap as it is illustrated in the coordinated plan. And then with that, making sure that your fleet has the right capacity and the right levels of accessibility as we try to serve people throughout our region. And then last but not least, of course, all of these elements should be in alignment with the coordinated plan. So being able to have some familiarity around what is listed in the coordinated plan, what are the associated regional goals and priorities, and then of course associated strategies would be very helpful to have a good understanding around and see what planning efforts you already have in place to make sure that these items are in alignment with the coordinated plan. So that's the overview of this particular slide and kind of the heart of what we're going to be discussing. So if you've applied for funding in the past, when we're talking about, let's say, capital projects, for example, a lot of people do apply for vehicles. And if you're in that space in terms of wanting to apply for a vehicle for expanding service, there actually is a very specific category for expanded service. So if that is something that you're pursuing pertinent to our regional coordination goals for expanded service, that would definitely be something to either refresh yourself around, but also if you're new and this is not necessarily something that you've embraced before, it's something to kind of make note of because we would need to have a further discussion around that. So to stick with the items that are on this agenda, I'm not going to go into those details because that wouldn't be appropriate for the discussion that's at hand for this agenda, but there is a nexus to those. So I think it's important to at least briefly mention it. So with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and open up the floor a little bit to help get a better understanding of how I can best support you as the regional mobility manager here at PAG. I am the transportation mobility coordinator, but through ADOT, I serve as the regional mobility manager. So with that being said, I want to know how I can best support you in efforts that are related to these regional coordination goals. So if you have questions, you have some success stories that you'd like to share, or just some things that you think really help your organization or things that you might want to connect with other organizations around to serve them well as part of your coordination efforts, this would be a great opportunity to kind of verbalize either those successes, if you will, or questions that you might have, or even just elements that you think that would be helpful in planning for these particular coordination goals. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the floor for discussion. And I'll do my best to pay attention to the little hand prompt that comes up by proxy of this platform. But I will be honest, sometimes I do miss one of those little hand prompts. So worst case, just unmute your mic and ask for me to notice. How about that? So if anyone has a question or a comment, feel free. I know there's people that have been a part of this working group for a while and are somewhat more familiar with the coordinated plan than others, and what it means for these coordination goals. And then we also have some folks that are relatively new. So I want to be fair to all participants on the call today. So I'm going to give a little bit of context. Oh, I see Steve. There we go. Thank you, Steve, for being patient with me. I didn't quite see the hand prompt right away. So go ahead. Go ahead, Steve Nath. I think I see your hand up still, the yellow prompt. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if you can hear me, Steve. All right, I'm going to try and come back to Steve.
And no, I for whatever reason the screen changed and I couldn't find the unmute mute button.
Oh, okay. All
I
right.
just had a quick question, and you may
Yeah.
not know the answer yet. Hopefully, they're gonna talk to us about it at the conference coming up. Do you know if they've come up with a solution yet for the Buy America program? Because it's difficult to plan vehicles,
Mhm.
especially out in the future. We don't know what's going to be available to us.
Yeah, I don't know that they've spoken to that yet, and I don't know exactly when they might share that information. I'm optimistic that it'll be at the ESTA conference, but I don't know. But that's a really great question. I'm just going to kind of make a footnote of that and serve that up to ADOT and see what we can find out. But to your point, tying it back to the agenda at hand, for planning for vehicles or expanding service or whatever your particular goal is, that information would definitely be helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and make note of that. I appreciate you bringing that. But for those that do need some additional context for what is in the coordinated plan, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. But with regard to some of the regional coordination goals that we're talking about, for the bullet points that were referenced, just some additional context is if you're looking, let's say, to serve in a rural area, some of the regional goals or associated priorities for trying to meet some gaps in the rural areas has to do with either coordination with public paratransit services. It has to do with expanding service with regard to like hours or days, and then coordination with any other nonprofit agency. Those would probably be like the top three, if my memory serves me correctly. And then for urbanized areas, expanding service hours is definitely one of them. And then coordination with public transit, you're seeing a kind of a theme there. And then, of course, coordination with nonprofit agencies that are part of 5310 as well. So definitely some similarities between rural and urban. Perhaps just the prioritization might be a little different. So definitely take a look at that and make sure that you're familiar with some of those goals and strategies that are outlined, and of course the respective prioritization, especially depending on if you serve in a rural or urbanized area here in the PAG region. There's definitely an emphasis, if you will, about support for transportation services. So what that might look like could be anything from like travel training to any type of information or resources that help either your drivers prevent accidents, things that are tied to pre and post trip inspections. There's lots of different elements within that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that, because that definitely will translate into efforts that are obviously aligned with the coordinated plan, but may also align with different types of funding as we prepare for the grant cycle. So another aspect that's in the coordinated plan that ties in with our regional coordination goals that we kind of briefly referred to is with regard to maintenance costs. So for those that are familiar with the grant cycle, there is a category of funding known as preventive maintenance. So that'd be something to take a look at within the goals and priorities in the coordinated plan. Preventive maintenance funding is referenced, as is general maintenance. And then of course, things regarding replacing vehicles, because we want to maintain a fleet that's in a state of good repair. That's important. And then of course, lift maintenance and the associated funding for that, because that's definitely important in terms of accessibility for those that use our services. So definitely take a look at that and make sure that you understand the associated priorities and the goals associated with our coordinated plan. That will help you in your planning over the next 8 to 10 months before the NOFA is released, et cetera, for the future grant cycle. So any other questions or comments? I think there's also a section in the coordinated plan with regard to some of the coordination goals and priorities that has to do with information resources. And I believe there's a focus on, serving people that are 65 and older. I believe there's also an emphasis on serving people who have a physical disability, and then other types of disabilities, whether it be visual impairment or hearing impairment. So definitely take a look at that as well. All right, so if there aren't any other questions, oh, I see a couple people joined us. So let me take a pause. If I could ask for some grace around that. And before we move to the next section, allow, I think 3 people have joined us. I wouldn't let that, like to have them have an opportunity to introduce themselves. So no particular order, I'm gonna call on Franny. Franny, would you like to just do a brief introduction, state your name, the organization you represent, and just maybe what your role is?
Good morning. Yes. Good morning, Janine and everybody else. My name is Frances Antone, and I am the transportation manager at the Archie Hendricks Skilled Nursing Facility, and we are a part of the Tanahatim Nation. We're located just west of Tucson, so we're way out here. We're in the middle of nowhere, but we have we just transport our residents here at the nursing home, and we don't really do any other. We don't have any other clients, just the residents that are here.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Franny. Appreciate you being here this morning. And then I see Eric Eller, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, Janine. I'm Eric Geller. I'm Associate Director with Easter Seals Blake Foundation and out of Tucson.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And then Deborah.
Yes. Hi, good morning. My name is Deborah Frant, and I'm with Catholic Community Services Vocational here in Tucson, Arizona. I'm the program manager.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And just to make sure, because we did disclose in kind earlier, if any of you your positions are paid with federal dollars, please share that now so we can calculate it into our in-kind. So you can either do that verbally or just send me an email stating that your position's paid with federal dollars so we don't incorporate that in there. So I appreciate your help with that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide on the agenda. And this one's with regard to program management. So if you haven't had an opportunity to look at the ADOT guidebook, especially as a new participant or a new applicant, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at it, because it does have so much information about the program and what it entails, what the expectations are, what the compliance related elements are, and also kind of a nice timeline, if you will, on how the grant cycle works, like when is a NOFA, all those particulars. Lots of other helpful information, resources, links, etc. So definitely take a look at that. Within the guidebook are a lot of compliance related elements. And so we're just going to touch on maybe 4 of them today in this particular topic. And this particular topic is project management. And so again, if you're familiar with the grant cycle, there is a whole section pertinent to project management in terms of how your applications are scored. Even if you're not applying for funding in the future, if you are a subrecipient of 5310 funds, project management and compliance is definitely important. And so we don't want to be remiss in any of our understandings about compliance or just lackadaisical in our approach to compliance. So with that, we're just going to do some helpful reminders, but also open it up for any kind of discussion, points of clarification that might be needed, or just like, I wish this process was just a little bit easier. What can we do to make it a little bit easier? So all of the above are appropriate for this discussion. I want this working group meeting to serve you well. And so the more discussion that we have, the more questions that are brought to the table, and you can find more value in the discussion. So that's my hope as we go through all of these agenda items, is that there's a certain sense of comfort that you can ask questions and bring ideas to the table so that we get the most out of these meetings. And of course, there's things that I can serve up to ADOT to get clarification around. That in turn, of course, serves you well through ADOT as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the first agenda item under project management, and that is scope of work or Exhibit A. So as a subrecipient of FTA Section 5310 funds, when you apply for funding, you are mapping out your scope of work, right? This is what we expect to accomplish if we are awarded funds. And this is the kind of the timeline in which we expect these objectives to be met, et cetera. And here's how we plan to execute it, whether through funding, resources, depending on what it is that you're applying for. The variables can vary, but there is always an emphasis on not only what you're going to accomplish, but kind of that sustainability of that project. So the scope of work is one piece, and then Exhibit A usually reflects that scope of work and also paints an accurate picture of kind of like the timeline and what's expected of you, et cetera. So they should kind of link arms. They should go hand in hand. So if you want to have confidence that you're meeting the expectations of your Exhibit A, it's helpful to know what all the compliance related elements are, but it's also definitely helpful to know what your scope of work is and what you agreed to when you accepted the award. So if you haven't looked at your Exhibit A in a while, now would be a great time to kind of do a little refresher. And then, of course, if you haven't looked at the grant application that you submitted when you receive funds in a while, now would be a great time to also revisit that, because those two, like I said, they should link arms and they should walk hand in hand. So interestingly enough, when you apply for funding in the future under project management, one of the things that gets asked is, how well did you execute what you said was in your scope of work and follow your contractual obligations pertinent to your Exhibit A? So there is the emphasis on knowing what's in it and making sure that you're executing it well. So take a moment over the next several weeks, month, whatever, and make sure you have a good understanding of that. And if you have questions, concerns, need some clarification on anything, please reach out to me, and I'll do my best to support you on that. If there's a question that I'm not super familiar with the answer to, I'll definitely seek ADOT's guidance on that as well. So there's that. Quarterly reports, that is probably everyone's favorite topic, but it's a very important topic. So quarterly reports are typically done quarterly, right? Everybody saw that one coming. There are a few people that choose to do it monthly, and that's okay, but they're typically characterized as a quarterly report. So here's where I feel like some agencies get a little confused on quarterly reports. So I wanted to kind of refer back to the guidebook, because that's where I'm getting this information from, right? It's from the ADOT guidebook. And you can actually Google it if you need the link. I could send it to you, but it is out there. It's the fiscal year 2023 ADOT Coordinated Mobility Program guidebook. So, but in the guidebook, there are some guidelines, if you will, on the quarterly reports. And so it really kind of depends on what type of funding you received. So we're going to try to make this really simple. All right. So if you received a capital project, such as a vehicle, here's where some extra clarity perhaps might come in for some of you that are on today's call, is regardless of whether or not the vehicle, talking about capital, whether or not the vehicle was purchased through ADOT funding, if you will, right, procured through ADOT, regardless of that, when you submit your quarterly report, all the data that it's asking of you is commensurate with all of those vehicles, regardless of how they were procured, I guess is one way to say it. So all vehicles being used in a 5310 capacity, regardless of how they were purchased, need to be tabulated into the data that is asked of you. So that is for capital for vehicles. And when you do your quarterly report, it is a performance report. So when you receive the ADOT form, it's a standardized form, there's basically kind of two sections. There's like a performance and a progress section. You'd be filling out the performance portion of that. For mobility management type projects, you only fill out a progress report, which is basically just sharing where you are in relationship to what you promised you would deliver for that particular project. So it's a progress report. And then for operating funds, those who receive operating funds, you're doing both. You're doing both the performance report section and a progress report. So if you need clarification on how to fill out that form, what is expected of you, feel free to reach out to me and I'll help you kind of navigate it and understand it a little bit better. But make sure that they're submitted quarterly. So we go by a federal fiscal year. So I'm sharing this for those that are brand new to this, so they have some context and kind of as a refresher for those that have doing it for a while. So we go through federal fiscal year, starts October 1st, right? So if you are going to do your, what we would call your Q1 report, it's going to reflect October, November, December, and you would serve up their report on around January 15th. But for some agencies, depending on how they do reporting, they take a full 45 days. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer to submit the report for October, November, December, but the goal is usually around January 15th to submit that report for that particular quarter. And then it continues on. So with that being said, so Q2's report would be served up in April because it's going to reflect January, February, March, and then we just keep going all the way until the end of September would be reported on October 15th on or around. All right, so that is for the quarterly reports. And again, if you need some guidance on how to fill out that report or what's expected of you, feel free to reach out to me. We do have a really great workbook that has that form in it, but it also has a section for you to document all your coordination efforts. So in our previous slide, we were talking about regional goals and coordination goals specifically. That's a great place to document some of your coordination efforts so that you don't lose track of them or lose sight of what you've been working on or what you've accomplished, because all that data actually pulls through to the end of the year, which will serve you well for having a year's worth of data, a year's worth of information on your coordination efforts. As far as ADOT is concerned, they don't only needs the ADOT report, they don't need the entire workbook. So depending on how you choose to submit your reports, you can either submit the entire workbook, you can submit just the form. The filling out of the workbook is helpful because it can help you track all of the information and have it pull from quarter to quarter without you having to do it manually. So let the tool work for you, right? So, but again, for the ADOT form, if you need some help or clarification, feel free to reach out to me. ADOT inspections and follow-up reporting. So this is a big one. So every month, as math around the 15th, ADOT serves up through EQS, which is their equipment services department, if you will, a list of all the vehicles according to their records that are either coming due or past due for inspection. So usually they send a reminder that says like, hey, here's some vehicles that are on the cusp of needing an inspection or already need an inspection. And it gives you some opportunity to kind of plan for that. And then if the clock moves forward and they still haven't been reconciled, meaning you haven't received anything that says an inspection has been completed, you would usually get another reminder saying these are past due. So I know that there's always some challenges with getting vehicles scheduled for inspection. There's lots of logistics involved. What I would share, and I see Franny's hand up, so I'm going to get your question in just a second, Franny. What I would share with is try to almost over communicate, I guess is one way to put it, right? So if you get that report and it says you have some vehicles that are past due or really close to being past due, as soon as you get them scheduled, even if you haven't taken them there yet, but you just have them scheduled, if you can communicate to ADOT saying like, hey, for these vehicles, X, Y, and Z, we have them scheduled for inspection on these dates. And that allows ADOT to have some confidence that you're working on it, and they'll be looking for your reports. And when you serve up your report saying that your vehicle's inspected, I's get dotted and the T's get crossed, and then those vehicles get removed from the list. What I also say is sometimes, not all the time, is when agencies update their fleet inventory, sometimes a little quirk happens in the database, and it almost does like a little bit of a reset on some vehicles, and it'll show in the database as though that vehicle hasn't been inspected like in a really long time, when that's not necessarily true. It's just, it kind of did like a refresh, I guess you could say, and it just needs to be updated. So if you get one of those notices and it looks like your vehicle hasn't been updated in a really long time, and you're saying to yourself, I know that cannot possibly be true, just take it for what it is, probably just a little glitch somewhere, and just serve up some information to ADOT that says, hey, I want to let you know this particular vehicle actually was inspected on this particular date, and then they can adjust it accordingly. So I don't think that happens often, but every once in a while you'll see something like that. So the moral of the story is, when you get those reports, definitely take a look at them. Be mindful of which ones are past due or coming to be past due for inspection, and schedule them as soon as possible. But like I said, almost over communicate. As soon as you get them inspected, or I'm sorry, scheduled for inspection, if you can communicate to ADOT that it's been scheduled and you're just waiting for the calendar to move forward, I think that can be really helpful. And of course, if you see a discrepancy in what ADOT's showing and what you're showing in your records, don't be hesitant to verbalize that and say like, hey, I think we have a disconnect. Can we try to reconcile this and get it fixed? So this way you're not getting any reports that conflict with what your records say. We can make sure that they're both saying the same thing. All right, so I'm gonna let Franny ask her question. Franny, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so can we go back to the quarterly reports? I had a question on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're talking about the workbook. I don't know if anybody else is having issues with it, but it's like the dates are not, I try to change the dates on there and it's not changing. It's staying in 2023. And and also the calculations, it's supposed to automatically calculate all your numbers, but it's not working out for me. I know I talked to you about this, Janine, before, and I don't think anything's been done about it.
Okay, let me check on that for you and see if anybody else is having that issue. Please let me know, so that I kind of have a sense of how many people are having that problem, or maybe there's just a,
or maybe they can send out a new workbook.
Yeah, maybe that'd be good.
Yeah.
Okay. I know they have some settings in there to kind of make sure things don't get tampered with, like some of the formulas and even perhaps, some other fields. So I don't know. I don't want to speculate. So I'm just going to go and ask ADOT if we could just take a look at that workbook and make sure all the formulas are right. And if there's some fields that we should have some permissions around to update, like such as a date, et cetera, that we allow that to happen. So I'll work with the parties that are involved, because I know ADOT didn't necessarily develop the workbook, so I want to be fair around that. Someone else developed the workbook, but then ADOT just has kind of allowed us to have the freedom to use it. But like I said, the ADOT is really the piece that they really want, they being ADOT. The workbook is supposed to just be a tool to help all of the agencies collect meaningful data, not only for ADOT, but for themselves, for planning, et cetera. So if the tool's not working up to par, that's definitely an issue that we want to address and get it resolved. So I wrote that down, and I'm going to reach out to some of the people that I believe helped create that workbook, if they can help champion getting it fixed and getting kind of a new and improved version, if you will, right? One that says 2024. One that
yes, that would be great. It would be very helpful.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, and then and moving on to the inspections. So like when we fail an inspection with ADOT and we bring our vehicles back for repairs, sometimes those repairs take longer then 10 days.
Right.
So I don't know what happens. I mean, like one of my vehicles did not pass inspection because there was some major issues. So it's really taking months to repair these tags, I guess that's what you would call them. So I don't know what's the process. As soon as we get them fixed, do we just schedule another inspection? I know we have the 10 days, but sometimes it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So I mean, the reasons for a failure can be as, you know, broad or as narrow, right? So I'm hesitant to give a very blanket statement because of there's so many variables in it. But here's what I will say. What I will say is, if you get an inspection done and it fails for any reason, right? And then you go and get it repaired, or you're working on getting it repaired. Like I was sharing before, almost over communicate, right? Let ADOT know that, yes, we know that our vehicle failed inspection, because if it went to an ADOT facility, they know already that it failed, right? Because it was done at one of their facilities. However, if you took it to a third party, which you're allowed to do, and it failed there, ADOT doesn't necessarily know right away that it failed, right? Because it's not connected to their system. So when you take it to a third party, or if you take it to a third party, the onus is on you, 1A, to serve up information to ADOT saying, like, yes, we did in fact get it inspected. And here's the report. And as you can see, did fail the inspection. And here's what we're doing to get it repaired. Okay, so let's say you've done that, right? You've got it inspected, whether at EQS or ADOT facility rather, or a third party, and whether through the automatic nature of the ADOT facility or on your own accord, you've submitted information that says our vehicle went through inspection and it failed for the following reasons, and whatever those reasons are, you state that, and then you say, but we were working on getting it repaired. Okay, so once you know it's more than likely going to exceed what we'll say kind of the acceptable window, I guess you could say, as per the guidebook, meaning like, you know, it's going to exceed the 10 days. I think that's when it would be appropriate to email ADOT and of course myself and say, this is what we understand to be the time frame for this vehicle to get repaired. It's an estimation because of, you know, the uphill climb, so to speak. You know, what do you need from us? As per the guidebook, it says, you know, X, Y, and Z, but what do you need from us? And let ADOT share what they need from you. It might be really simple, right? Or they might say, okay, here's what we need you to do, and they'll share that. I always advocate for kind of for over communicating, because this way you've done your responsibility of communicating where you're at, and then you can have confidence that you're going to get the information that you need back in terms of an answer from ADOT that you know is in alignment with their policy, because it's their policy, right? And they're the ones that are going to be sharing the answer with you. So I would think that would be a good first step. If you want to send me the example that you're kind of generalizingly speaking about right now, and say like, hey, can you help me get some guidance on this? I'd be more than happy to do that for you. And that's for everyone. Like if you run up into a situation where you're like, I don't know what we do with this one, you can feel free to call me or email me and say like, hey, can you help me get some additional guidance on this? And I'll champion it for you. I'll call ADOT or I'll email them, whatever you need me to do to get that clarification that you need. So I would say that's a good place to start.
Thank you, Janine.
Yeah. So I know it sounds like a non-answer because of how there's just so many variables, but I do want you to have confidence that if you need that clarification, if you send me an email and we forward it up to ADOT, that we can work together to get you the answer you need. I think part of the reason why the guidebook in some instances is kind of written at a higher level view, seems a little bit generalized, is because there are so many nuances and variables, and it's hard to put something very lockstep because there's so many variables. So you could just kind of take it almost case by case to some extent and see what their guidance is on that. And the other piece is you want them to give you that guidance once that you're, obviously in compliance. But the other piece would be, if the goal is to keep vehicles in a state of good repair, right? And that's one of the things that's illustrated in the coordinated plan, so I'm not off topic. You do want to know at what point does it no longer make sense to, continue with the vehicle relative to its condition and the mileage, and that's why there's a vehicle disposal process. So there's just lots of factors in play. So again, when you run into one of those situations, it's helpful just kind of talk through it and see where things sit. Okay, any other questions? I'm trying to look to see if I see any other hands raised. Give me if you've had your hand up for a minute and I haven't seen it. Okay. All right. So data inspections and follow-up reporting, I think, is what we were still talking about. So I think we talked a lot about the ADOT inspections and whether or not you go to an ADOT station or an EQS station. But tying back to what Franny was sharing in terms of her question, it ties well into the follow-up reporting. So even if your vehicle doesn't fail an inspection, let's say it passes, remember that especially if you took the vehicle to a third party, the onus is on you to serve up the report that shows that you got it inspected. So you do have to scan it and submit in, and that's that follow-up piece. If it fails, or maybe it doesn't fail, but they say like, hey, be mindful, these are some things that your vehicle might need in the future. As soon as you get those things done, obviously it's important to document it, but especially if it's pertinent to a failure, you want to communicate to ADOT that it's been repaired immediately. So as soon as you know that it's been repaired, submit the appropriate documentation. And I think that's perhaps where sometimes people forget to submit, is that follow-up reporting, meaning either we got it done at a third party and we forgot to scan our inspection. It doesn't mean we didn't do it, we just forgot to scan it and send it in. Or they do all the great work of getting the vehicle repaired and back in service, they forget to send documentation that shows those repairs. So just be really mindful of the follow-up reporting piece. And of course, making sure you're maintaining all of your documentation of those repairs, because in the next section, which is under fleet maintenance, we'll talk about a little bit more, but that is something that would be looked at if you were ever have like a site visit, or call it like an audit, and they would look through your fleet maintenance records. They'd be looking for that kind of documentation, kind of twofold, like, A, did you do what is appropriate, but did you also communicate it to ADOT? So looking for both. So the next item on the topic of project management is the management of federal funds and equipment. And so that's a very broad topic, broad statement, but it's obviously very important because it's a compliance piece, it's project management. It illustrates how well we're able to be a good steward of federal dollars, whether those federal dollars are in the form of a vehicle or some kind of capital asset, or in the form of dollars that you draw down on in terms of reimbursement, whether it be for operating costs, preventive maintenance, et cetera. So the management of federal funds and equipment is incredibly important. So when you're looking at reimbursements, for example, the reimbursements plus the report and any supporting documentation, they all kind of go hand in hand. They kind of reinforce each other. So typically what we see is those that apply for operating funds or kind of preventive maintenance, because of the expectation of how those funds are drawn down, we don't necessarily see agencies forgetting to submit a quarterly report as often. It's usually when agencies only apply for a vehicle or a capital asset that sometimes you can get out of the rhythm of submitting the quarterly report. So again, emphasis on the quarterly reports, making sure that they're submitted. But when we're talking about management of federal funds and equipment, documentation of your receipts and how those funds were expended are incredibly important, one for compliance, but also if you were to get a site review or an audit to show that you are in compliance. So when we talk about drawing down on funds or just taking good care of vehicles, some of the documentation that would be appropriate to make sure that you're keeping and have available and have any appropriate communication tied to it would be starting all the way from, let's say, vehicle delivery. So when you receive a vehicle, you should receive some like acceptance documents. I guess that's one way to characterize it. In recent time, we've had checklists and things of that nature to allow you to have a little bit more confidence on what it looks like to accept a vehicle from the time that you are notified that it's ready for pickup. So if you're an agency that's getting ready to pick up a vehicle and you've never done it before and you need a kind of a refresher on what the process is or want to ensure that you have some tools or some checklists to help guide you through that process, free to reach out to me because it is available to you. But those are documents that you want to hold on to. Obviously, the vehicle registration, your insurance certificates, all your inspection documents that we've been talking about, the respective Exhibit A talked about earlier. And then here's some of the other pieces that ties back into quarterly reports, which would be all of your ridership data, your ridership logs, or trip logs, I guess is one way to put it. Those pre and post trip inspections. Can't really emphasize that enough. The pre and post trip inspections, those tell you so much information about the vehicle before anyone ever gets in it. And then of course the condition of the vehicle, after a trip is completed so that you're set up for success for the next set of riders, but also it opens your eyes to any potential preventive maintenance issues that need to be addressed, but also lends itself to allowing you to also be mindful of warranty work, which is the next thing that is on the list of documentation that you should have in your file. So knowing what the manufacturer recommends for maintenance, whether it be general or preventative, and then of course what it states for warranty work and making sure that you're on top of those elements. And then of course, any repairs that are done, your repair files. And then last but not least, driver training records. So for those that are familiar with the grant cycle process and have received funds, especially for a vehicle, you know that there's a section in there that talks about the driver training that your drivers go through, and you check the respective boxes saying these are the different training practices that we execute, and some of them are absolute requirements, and others perhaps there's a little bit more of an optional component to it. The more that you can illustrate the breadth and the scope of your driver training practices, the better, whether it be in written form through your documentation and or when you go to apply for funding in the future. So if you're ever wondering what might I communicate in the event of a site visit or to driver training or maintenance, your documentation should help guide you with those conversations, but also it should help you set the stage for your planning efforts so that when there is a grant cycle and you're filling out a grant application, the work that you've done in the reporting and the compliance can then be used to add value to your grant application because they do connect, right? So if you've been doing your maintenance in a regular fashion and your pre and post trip inspections, you should have a lens of what your preventive maintenance costs are. You should have a lens for what your general maintenance costs are. You should have a lens for how many trips you make and how many riders, right, through your reporting, how many people are you serving in the region? And then if you're looking at your driver training practices, you should be able to have confidence that says, yes, we meet the expectation, but we're also doing above and beyond, or we'd like to even do more, which is why we're applying for funding in the future. So all of these metrics and all of these compliance related elements not only help your organization meet the expectation as a subrecipient, they also can help you be successful in future grant cycles. So because all those pieces are not only looked at during a site review or a site visit, they're also the very things that are looked at your grant application is reviewed. So if you're doing the right things as a subrecipient of funds, it will lend in itself in terms of the competitiveness, if you will, in terms of your application for potentially being awarded funds in the future, right? So be very mindful of those pieces. If you need clarification or guidance on what those expectations mean or what things you should be keeping, or are you keeping all the right things, feel free to reach out to me. I know we did mock site visits a while back, and you kind of got a sense of all the different things that could be evaluated, but we just picked a few just to kind of allow people the opportunity to kind of get a sense of its scope and breadth. I always encourage people to take a look at those documents because they do tie directly to what we're talking about right now, which is project management piece, but also, or I'm sorry, what we were talking about, which is the project management piece. We also talk about fleet maintenance, which is what we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, which is for fleet maintenance. And you'll see kind of how we're talking about for project management under management of federal funds and equipment ties well into this particular category of fleet maintenance. So this is also aligned with the coordinated plan, because if you look at our regional goals and priorities, some of the funding priorities are pertinent to some of the things that we are discussing here. So for fleet maintenance, this is the section that I'd really would encourage this to be more of an open discussion, because I think this is an area where it can be a struggle. It can be a struggle for organizations. And I know Steve asked a really great question about the Buy America and, where does things stand? Because that's been a thing that ADOT's been trying to navigate for a bit, because that does play a role in your forecasting and your planning efforts, and it ties into fleet maintenance, right? You're maintaining a fleet in a state of good repair. And when you ask for a vehicle or you're getting awarded potentially a vehicle, that's part of your fleet. But with fleet maintenance, there's all these things that you're seeing on this slide. It's the pre and post trip inspections, like I alluded to a moment ago, the vehicle inspections that we were talking about not too long ago, but then all these other pieces. So lift maintenance. So some agencies have historically only applied for vehicles that had ramps, or maybe the vast majority of their vehicles had ramps and not lifts. But over time, we've started to kind of see a shift, and a lot more agencies do have vehicles with lifts in their fleet, and then still obviously vehicles with just ramps. But lift maintenance, if that's a new territory for you in terms of cycle count and all that's required to make sure a lift is functioning correctly, I would strongly encourage you to coordinate with other agencies who have been navigating keeping a fleet in a state of good repair that the vast majority of their fleet has lifts. So I know Senvan's on the call today. So for example purposes, Senvan, the vast majority, if not all of their vehicles have lifts, I would imagine. So if anyone has a great lens for what's required of lift maintenance, that would be one organization that definitely has that. Town of Aurora Valley, similar, they would have a similar lens for that. And there's lots of other organizations that have a robust fleet with lifts in it. So if you're still kind of grappling and trying to figure out what does that look like, what are some best practices to make sure our lifts are maintained well, I'd strongly encourage you to reach out to those organizations as a supplement to doing your research in terms of what the guidebook says and what ADOT expects. And then, of course, you can also reach out to me for any additional guidance. I think it's healthy to take a look at those particulars and have a conversation with an agency that lives and breathes it every day and does it well and does it with excellence, because that you can learn a lot from having those conversations. So lift maintenance is a big thing, and I definitely encourage you to kind of get an understanding of what that looks like, what the costs associated with that are, and start having some discussions around that. Mobile maintenance is another hot topic that I'd like to kind of open the floor around, and especially in rural areas where it can be challenging to get vehicles in for repairs. And then the remaining elements on here kind of tie back to some of the stuff that we've already talked to, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these except for perhaps one, and that is the compliance and reporting, which I think we've talked about enough in terms of me talking about it for the scope of these agenda items. But obviously, if there's something you would like to discuss about it, we could definitely do that. The forecasting of costs, like I was saying before, if you're doing your documentation well and meeting all your compliance elements well, it should serve you in some capacity to calculate what you think your future costs would be. Obviously, things can change and there's always some nuance, but for the most part, it helps you get a sense of what your costs could be. And then e-grants and reimbursements, we tied that back to the supporting documentation, what is expected when you seek reimbursement, but also back to the quarterly reports, the timing of seeking reimbursement is important, right? So making sure that you're doing that in a timely fashion. And then back to what Franny had shared about when a vehicle fails inspection, or you have an unforeseen repair come to fruition, how does your fleet maintenance potentially impact the service that you provide? So being very mindful of that, because that's what you don't want to have happen, right? You don't want to have your fleet get to a place where it starts impacting your service, right? And so being mindful of the age of your fleet, the overall condition of your fleet, when it makes sense to start looking at replacing a vehicle, what vehicles are tending to need more and more maintenance, the associated costs with keeping them in a state of good repair. All those pieces can potentially impact service, either in a positive or in a negative. And so being mindful of those pieces can help you navigate that well, to not only address it or to prevent it, but it also should help you kind of shape good questions that says, hey, how can we address this? Here's what I'm seeing based on our data and our fleet. And I think if we can be ahead of the curve, be proactive in our approach based on what I'm seeing, here's some questions that I have, and get that guidance in advance. So you're not necessarily seeking the guidance when it's crunch time, you're seeking guidance well in advance of something that you are seeing that could come into fruition, right? So whether it be like your vehicle's getting really high in miles, or there seems to be an uptick in lift repairs, or there seems to be an uptick in something else, right? Whatever the story might be, just being really mindful of what are those patterns, what are those trends that you're seeing, and then what does that look like relative to your entire fleet. So just being mindful of that. So I'm going to open it up because I know there's agencies in our group here that have had some challenges with some of these topics and would like to kind of see if other people are experiencing those challenges. I know there's agencies here that have had tremendous success in how they do some of these pieces, and I'm confident that if one of those pieces is not necessarily your bench strength, that you would be eager to kind of pick their brain and say like, hey, how did you come up with that? What did you do? Can I take a look at your document, or whatever the case may be? All those different types of exchanges of resources and information and knowledge really bode well in terms of just overall coordination. It's relationship building. It helps you kind of sharpen your own sauce, so to speak, but also it gives you an opportunity to strengthen someone else. So I would encourage that. And then of course, document it, because in your coordination efforts, you can cite that in your grant application in terms of coordination efforts. So I'm going to open up the floor, and under fleet maintenance, any topics of the bullet points that you see on your screen, you're welcome to ask a question or a comment or share a success around. I just really want this topic to serve you well, because this topic overflows into so many other aspects that I think it deserves some time to have some fruitful discussion around. So I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. I'm going to try and look for that little yellow hand icon, because sometimes I don't see it. So would it be helpful for me to just like pick one topic? So for pre and post trip inspections, let's start with that one, because I feel like that might be the low hanging fruit and kind of easier for everyone to participate in. There's a lot of agencies on this call that are brand new to the working group. They haven't necessarily had to do the pre and post trip inspections in terms of compliance related elements for being a subrecipient. They might still do them on their own accord, just of nature of their organization, but not necessarily from an ADOT perspective. So I think it'd be helpful for people to share what they do that they feel like they do really well, so that others can kind of hear that and kind of measure it against what they know they do. And perhaps there's some epiphanies, if you will, or food for thought that comes from that people might say, like, I think I should reach out to that individual and learn more, because I don't know that we include that in ours, or sounds like they have an easier way of doing their pre and post trip inspections, and maybe we can make our process a little bit easier. So I'm just going to ask for thoughts on pre and post trip inspections at this point. Anyone have any words of wisdom, questions? I might just have to call on someone.
I don't know that I have words of wisdom, Janine. This is Steve with Hope.
Hi, Steve.
I think we have a really great pre and post trip tool. What we have found, though, is that our frontline staff are a little less invested in doing a thorough examination. So we found that on top of those daily trip inspections, we continue to do our own monthly inspections, where we come and we look at the vehicles and bring a different eye to the situation, and that has helped us be more in front of some of the maintenance issues that arrive on vehicles on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I know Tanavora Valley isn't on the call today, but they have a really unique pre and post trip inspection process, and in terms of how they encourage or reward, however you want to phrase it, their drivers to actually find something wrong, so to speak, right? And to encourage like the thoroughness and the completeness of the checklist. So they have a very unique approach. So if you haven't had an opportunity to talk to either John Hawbaker or Mike Alexander from Townover Valley, I encourage you to do so. They actually shared their process, I think, once at one of the ASTA conferences. So I know they're very open to sharing their process. But Steve, I like how you're willing to share your process, meaning kind of like that it's twofold. There is the, if I'm understanding correctly, there is the expectation of the drivers to do it, but then also you kind of, sounds like another level within the organization also circles back and takes a look. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Well, because we have so many sites, it's impossible for us to be with every vehicle, but we ask each site to do, the daily, every time you get in and out of the vehicle inspection. And then we ask the sites to do a monthly inspection. And then Irma and I will go out to the sites on a regular basis and do our own inspection. But on top of that, we actually pay an extra fee to our vendors, and we have them do a safety check whenever we're having a preventive maintenance service done. And then that's on top of the annual check by ADOT. So we just want eyes on the vehicle as often as possible, just to make sure that we're catching everything. It seems like it's more than needed, but we have, our goal is never to have a vehicle, be on the side of the road in 110-degree heat with members in it and stuff. It's just, we would rather do a little bit more upfront to make sure that the fleet never fails versus waiting for something catastrophic to happen.
Right. No, I think that's great. So thank you, Steve. I appreciate you sharing that. And if anyone has any questions for Steve, like how they put that together or what they've learned from doing that, but that's a valid question or use of our time. So if anyone has any general questions or comments for Steve based on what he shared, feel free to go ahead and ask. Steve, it looks like you're off the, oh, I see Elizabeth's hand. I was gonna say, Steve, it looks like you're off the hook. I don't see any questions, but Elizabeth, go ahead.
Actually, I don't have a question for Steve, but I'm wondering if there is anyone else in that operates senior living like we do that I'd be able to connect with after the call, just to ask questions, about how they've started out, and how long they've been in the program and how it's working for them and those sorts of things. Just a similar situation. I know we are, obviously client centric, and we're dealing with an aging fleet and that sort of thing. So just wondering if there was anybody I could connect with after the call. Doesn't even have to be today, obviously, sometime in the next couple of weeks to talk through how their process has worked out.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know if we have anyone on the call that might represent kinds of services, but I could be wrong. So I'm gonna let those that are on the call answer that. Is there anyone on the call today that offers that kind of service? Okay. Elizabeth, you and I can connect after the call and see how I can potentially connect you with someone that does something similar, even if they weren't on the call today, so that you still have that opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Right. Let's see. So for lift maintenance, I know we have some folks that are definitely some experts on lift maintenance. So I'm gonna be bold and maybe ask someone from Sunvan if they don't mind sharing what they do from lift maintenance, or maybe even someone from Easter Seals. So let's see if we can get someone to share if they're willing what they do for.
Hi, I'm Anna from Sunvan.
Yeah.
And yeah, usually our lift maintenance gets done through Ryder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You basically contract that out, so to speak. You ask them to do it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, they actually have a conjoined building like here with us. So they're here, on right in front of us, and they do all of our lift maintenance for us.
Okay.
So it really helps when a driver is doing their pre-trips. If they are having trouble with their lifts, we just send them over to Ryder and Ryder can take care of it.
So not to put you on the spot, but like, is there any like key takeaways that you've learned by using them? Like, oh, it's really important to do this, or
Oh yeah,
this
usually
tour.
usually like the dispatchers here are really good at also pinpointing certain things that need to get done. Sometimes they'll say make sure the plate in front of the lift is like fully up, or make sure if the driver is out on the road and they can't lower the lift or something, if it gets stuck, the dispatchers here will tell them, like, to do it manually. So, I mean, we can tell them to, like, manually, when you kind of put the crowbar type thing, we put it in and you turn it a little bit counterclockwise, and then it'll go down on its own. I mean, there's certain things that we've learned from Ryder for the lift. But of course, if they're stuck out there, we have to send Ryder to go out there and assist them.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, thank you for sharing that. And then I would encourage anyone on the call, if you'd like to learn more about what Sunvan does and how they've worked with Ryder and what they've learned by going through that process and having them champion their lift maintenance. I would encourage you to do that. Probably some really great insights that you could get from that. So even if you never apply for a vehicle with a lift, at least not, in the upcoming grant cycle, it's still good to just be aware of what it takes to maintain vehicles with lifts and what that looks like, so that if you do decide to apply for one in the future, whether it be the next cycle or one after that, you could start preparing well. So not just from a funding perspective, but like staff, resources, all that stuff. So I definitely encourage you to take advantage of getting some wisdom from people who have done it for a while and are doing it well. So definitely take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, so what about mobile maintenance? This is a topic that has been kind of floating around for a while. Is anyone using a mobile maintenance entity to come and help them, either just intermittently when things kind of go astray, or it's just something that they always use? Anyone looking for mobile maintenance options? Because I know for rural agencies, this has been a topic that's probably been brought up perhaps a little bit more often than those serving in more urbanized areas. But I don't want to assume that just because someone's in an urbanized area that mobile maintenance option isn't something that would be of value, because depending on time of day that your services are running relative to when like a repair shop is typically open, mobile maintenance might still make a whole lot of sense for you for different reasons. Just because it's been historically, I guess you say, more of a rural serving type discussion, does not mean it's not something that could be important to those serving in urbanized areas. So mobile maintenance, any thoughts? Anyone using it? Anyone want to use it? Gonna look for the hands up on here. See if I see anyone. Steve, are you guys using mobile maintenance at all, or is that something that you guys are looking at?
We don't. We have good vendor relationships in all our spots, even in the rural areas, which is mostly what we are. We do have established roadside service, so depending on whether you're in Tucson or Yuma or Nogales or Show Low, we have this is who we want to call for roadside, because we know that this is what they'll do for us and stuff. If, like I said, if we ever had a preferred vendor that stopped servicing vehicles, we might look at a mobile maintenance in the rural areas. It's a great idea. And if we had all of our vehicles in one location, it might be even a better idea, but it's really hard when you have got 4 vehicles here and there and other 4 vehicles 100 miles away, and it's difficult.
Okay. And then what about for, I'm going to put Franny on the spot. Sorry, Franny, but you're definitely in a rural area. And I'm trying to think of other folks that are in rural areas. So are you looking at any mobile maintenance options, or do you currently use a mobile maintenance option?
We are currently not using mobile, but we do have local vendors that we take our vehicles to if we break down anywhere in the area. They will send out a tow truck, so they're always there to support us in that way, so we don't use a mobile
Okay.
maintenance. We do use sometimes we do use the mobile windshield replacements.
Mhm.
They'll come out and do that, but most of the time we schedule all of that to the closest town from where we're at, which is about I would say about 50 miles. And then we also have our tribe that we're trying to establish a relationship with their motor pool, so we
Mhm.
can do our repairs there. But right now it's not in place. We're still working on that, which is about 30 miles from where we're at. So we have we mainly focus on taking our vehicles up to Casa Grande, which is the closest right now.
Them to
But in the future, we're looking at building our own maintenance shop here, and hiring certified mechanics to do our maintenance on our fleet. But that's a few years down the line.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Anyone else have some thoughts around mobile maintenance? All right. So then the last one I'll do a generalized call around, because I think the other ones probably are a little too broad in scope for a meaningful discussion, although I'm not saying we can't talk about it. I'll let you decide, but just as a me thinking what might be useful for opening up for more fruitful discussion. The forecasting of costs. And I'm going to link this back to how it is for when people apply for funding, so that when those that have applied before or those that have never applied before consider applying, just like it is in the guidebook, and you want to show alignment to the coordinated plan, forecasting costs is incredibly important. So you want to be able to forecast costs well, so that you can have confidence that the project is sustainable, and that project should align with the regional goals and priorities in the coordinated plan, right? And those forecasting costs can show up in a variety of different categories, right? So costs can be attributed to staffing costs. It can be attributed to taking on more drivers, which, depending on how you view it, that could still be considered staff. It can be attributed to increased maintenance costs. It could be attributed to just other types of overhead, fuel. I mean, the list goes on depending on what it is that you're applying for funding around. Even if it's not vehicle related, it's still something that's going to help serve individuals that this funding, meaning FTA Section 5310, is designed to serve, which is elderly and disabled populations. Whether it's like a mobility management type project, such as like travel training, or any kind of rider support, increase of accessibility, those pieces. Anything like that's, you know, in the grant application, you want to be able to show how you can sustain the project. And one of the best ways you can show your ability to sustain a project is to have it illustrated that you have the utmost confidence that you have a good sense of what the forecasted costs will be and how you came up with that number, right? Is it just an arbitrary number, a best guess? You know, you picked it out of a stack of piece of papers, it just sounded good? Or have you been tracking this data for a while? You know, and if you look at it relative to your fleet, or you look at it relative to what you're trying to accomplish, given, you know, this particular project that you're applying for, and you compare it to other projects or other studies, or however you need to characterize it, you can show that you came up with the numbers, a very fact-based approach, and you have the numbers to support it, the research to support it, and you can speak to it well, to the point to even showing, you know, the math, like how'd you come up with that number. So forecasting costs, the compliance, all the reporting, all those tools that oftentimes get shelved under just a compliance bucket. I really hope that by looking at it through the lens of saying, how can this data that we're serving up for compliance also serve us well when we go to apply for funding, can allow for kind of a richer experience, not just in the day-to-day operations, but also confidence in applying for funding, because it is a competitive grant, but most importantly, to move the needle on the goals and objectives that are outlined in the coordinated plan. So just trying to just break down some silos of thought, I guess, is a good way to put it. So forecasting costs, if anyone has some insights, some wisdom, or even questions around, you know, approaches to calculating, predicting, and forecasting costs, I think that's a good use of time for people to kind of voice their concerns or their questions. And then the same spirit, if you're an agency that you feel that you're doing that component exceptionally well, you know, how did you go about it? Or what were some things that you thought of and incorporated into your approach that perhaps in the past you didn't, but because you were really intentional about thinking about these things, whatever they are, it's really made a difference for you. So if you want to share that or ask questions around it, and if it's in a generalized sense, I think that would be appropriate under forecasting of costs. If anyone has anything to share or questions to ask, I'm going to look to see if anyone has their hand raised. Steve, sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
it's okay. I kind of feel like this is one of the things that we kind of do well. We use a lot of historical data because we keep a spreadsheet on every vehicle. So from the time we take possession of that vehicle to the time we dispose of it, we just list everything that we've ever done to it. And then of course we have the backup for that in case we ever get audited. The other thing that we do is there's a lot of great sites out there that'll forecast specific vehicle costs over their lifetime. Like we know that a Dodge Caravan, as much as we all love them, at 60,000 miles, your maintenance costs go up exponentially because things start to break down. So we use that, and then we look at the mileage of the vehicle, and the next 2 years when we're talking about the grant cycles, and are we likely to need any large repairs on that? Are we likely to need tires? When's the last time we put tires on? So I'll write in, like if it's a Caravan with over 60,000 miles, I know that I'm going to have motor mounts, window actuators, possibly a top end repair that needs to be done, and then if it needs tires, I'll write in for tires as well. So it's I think you have to do a little bit of forecasting on using the different sites that say, hey, this is what you're likely to run into, and then use your historical data to determine what to ask for. That's how we determine our ask as far as preventive maintenance goes.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. That's really good information. And then if anyone has any questions or comments relative to what Steve just shared, I'm opening up the floor for that as well. Or if anyone has some thoughts of their own in terms of what they do to forecast costs or questions around how they might do it better. And you're doing it poorly, just better. That's appropriate as well. So I'll give the floor for that. And while you're thinking of your comments or questions, I just wanted to tie back really quick to the inspections, because it's still related to fleet maintenance, obviously, and best practices that we're trying to kind of share or voice concerns around. When you take your vehicle in for inspection at an ADOT facility, when you get your inspection report back, when you sign off of it, you're signing off that you agree to the results of the inspection. So what I think is important for agencies to be mindful of is that's your opportunity to ask questions and really understand what's in the report. It's also your opportunity to address anything that you might disagree with in the report, right? So let's say, hypothetically speaking, the inspector didn't see the road hazard triangles, right? Or didn't see the bloodborne pathogen kit, right? And there's other examples, but let's just use those two. But it is in the vehicle, right? They just didn't see it. So there's two things that come to mind. What is the opportunity to be proactive when you go and take your vehicle in for inspection to make sure that the inspector knows that the triangles are located in a specific spot? And then if for whatever reason they didn't, that you point that out so it doesn't fail unnecessarily, right? Like, should it be visible? Should they have seen it? Of course, absolutely. Should it have failed just because it wasn't seen? Perhaps not, right? So instead of having to get back in for inspection for a failure that could be prevented, try to look for ways to be proactive about it. The other part is sometimes, we're all human and people make a mistake, right? They didn't use a piece of equipment correctly, or they didn't look at a particular element of the inspection quite right. And by talking through it, you go, oh, I see where the disconnect is. And then you talk through it and they're like, oh, okay, you're wrong. Sorry. It doesn't really fail. It works fine. Or, oh, I see where you put it. There's just different examples that have popped up over time. Doesn't happen all the time, but there are examples of things that have happened where an inspector, just missed something or didn't use it in the proper manner, and it got perceived as being not functional when it really was functional. So I think it's just your opportunity to really have some kind of a conversation with the inspector right out of the gate, saying like, hey, just want to set you up for success. I know the triangles, the bloodborne pathogen kit is something you're looking for. Here's what it is. Here's where it's stored in this vehicle, so it'll be easy for you to find. Because there are agencies that store it in one spot and another agency that can store it in a very different spot. And sometimes inspectors get just really used to looking for it in one particular spot. And if they don't see it, they just assume it's not there, but it really was there, just in a different spot. So communicate that. The other part is, if you're doing your pre and post trip inspections well, it shouldn't fail, hypothetically, for what I call some of the easier failures. Like, they shouldn't be easy to fail. They should be ones that you never fail on. So I'm drawing a blank, so I'm gonna ask for a lot of grace on this example, but let's just say windshield wipers, right? We live in the desert, a whole lot except for monsoon season. And I'll be honest, on my own personal vehicle, I don't ever think about looking at the windshield wipers until what day? Day we have our first monsoon, and I turn them on, and because they're just pathetic, they just basically fall apart right there on my windshield, and they're serving absolutely no reasonable function. So that's not the time to realize that you need new windshield wipers is in the midst of a monsoon. that's just me as an individual. I'm not providing transportation services to elderly or disabled populations. So if you're doing your pre and post trip inspection, there are some things that should come up in advance and saying, windshield wipers are probably at a place where they need to be looked at, repaired, not repaired, but replaced, or need to be mindful of this. They're good right now, but probably in a few months we need to have it looked at to make sure a dry rot on our tires, or we don't tread isn't below a certain depth. Like if you're looking at those things periodically as part of your pre and post trip inspection process, hopefully when you take it in for an inspection, it doesn't fail for anything. But if it is going to fail for something, let it not be for they couldn't see the bloodborne pathogen kit, they couldn't see the roadside triangles, or your windshield wipers are dry rotted, or the tread is below a certain amount for tires. Anything that definitely requires like a mechanic's sharp eye and skill set and knowledge and wisdom, fair enough. That's all fair game. They get to decide whether or not that really meets the standard or not. But stuff that the average person should be able to acknowledge on their own, those are the things that perhaps it should not fail for. So in our draft checklist that has been sent out, it uses what the inspectors look for when they do their inspections as per ADOT's guidance. And it's kind of separated into two sections that says, here's kind of like the low-hanging fruit that like average person should be able to kind of get a sense around, or at least be able to have a decent conversation with the inspector before or immediately after to make sure everything's good. And then here's other stuff that probably is above most of us's skill set because we're not mechanics, and that yes, we're gonna have to trust them in their diagnosis of that. Still gonna want to have a good understanding of what's happening, what's not happening, so that when we sign the form, we know what we've agreed to, we know what the next steps are. Maybe even learn from it and say like, oh, if we don't want this to happen again, here's what we can do differently. So I say take advantage of those conversations with the inspector when you can, because I know for a lot of agencies it's hard just to even get a vehicle in for one inspection, let alone have to bring it back for something that was kind of an easy fix right out of the gate. So that's kind of my message on that. And so when we say like reach out to other organizations and see what they're doing well, even if you feel like you're doing really well with it, it never hurts to ask another agency how they navigate that process, because maybe there's an opportunity to do it even better. So just wanted to bring that up because we have seen kind of a slight uptick in inspections that have failed for things that I really think could have been prevented, or I would like to think that they could have been prevented. So if scheduling inspections is already challenging for a lot of different reasons, you don't need to throw in inspections that didn't necessarily need to happen because we could have prevented it into the mix. So just wanted to share that. Let's see. So the other pieces were compliance and reporting. We've talked about that pretty much at length. E-grants and reimbursements. So we did touch on the importance of making sure your documentation is ready and available and filed and submitted with your reimbursement request. Same with the report that goes with it, depending on what type of reimbursement you're seeking. But the e-grants piece, obviously you're seeking reimbursement through e-grants. If you need help, guidance, assistance on how to be better at doing the reimbursements through e-grants, you can reach out to me and I can help coordinate with ADOT, kind of like a one-on-one type of training to some extent on like how do you get past some of the things that are kind of holding you back and being really successful. The other part is if I hear from a lot of people kind of a pattern, like here's where everyone's kind of struggling, then I could take that to ADOT and say like, okay, I have this many people as part of our working group, and based on, feedback, I have 10 agencies that all kind of struggle in different ways with this particular element. Is there a way that we can do like kind of a refresher training that's specific to that particular element of reimbursements? I can help champion that and see what we can do. The other piece is it can tell you in advance that you need to kind of sharpen your saw on e-grants reimbursements. And so when the next training comes to pass that ADOT typically offers, you can make sure that you're plugged into that. But also you can make sure that other people who support you in that process and your staff perhaps attend as well, or perhaps like a backup person in case you're ever absent on vacation, what have you, and someone still needs to champion reimbursements on your behalf. They're not completely lost. If you're new to the whole working group and you're still trying to figure out if this is something you want to apply for future, or just continue to just be part of the working group and not necessarily become a subrecipient or potential subrecipient, just understanding what is asked of you in terms of how to navigate eGrants and start to understand how eGrants works, making sure you have everything you need to be successful in using eGrants is something that the sooner you can start, the better, because you don't want to have such a steep learning curve when you're right in the midst of still trying to make sure you're executing all your compliance pieces. So anything that you can do proactively, I think, can serve you well. So every time you go into eGrants, if you're a current subrecipient, take note of the things that are frustrating or you're not sure that you're super clear on. And it's okay to ask for help, right? Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of courage. So take advantage of asking for help, because you probably are not the only one that struggles with that. And there's probably people that have struggled with it too in the past. And so we can work on those pieces together and help build you up. So eGrants. Some things are easy within eGrants, some things are a little bit more challenging, and that's okay, but we can get through it. So reach out for help. And much like what Steve has shared and others have shared with a lot of the stuff that we champion every day from a compliance standpoint, but also just for the well-being of those we are providing services for, everything we do is rooted on making sure that something doesn't go out of alignment, so to speak, and it either prevents service from happening or has some kind of negative service impact. So make sure you're taking the fleet maintenance and all these compliant pieces seriously for those reasons, of course, as well. So any questions or comments about fleet maintenance in general? Anything that you just right now know right out of the gate you really want some extra support around or clarification around, so that we could start planning for that? Because things don't just surface overnight when it comes to training. And if anybody's ever put a training together, it takes a little bit of time. So I'd like for us to have kind of the feedback and then the ability to kind of go through that process of figuring out what's the best way to bridge that knowledge gap, and make sure you have a time to appreciate it or be a part of it and implement some of the takeaways well in advance of any upcoming reimbursement requests, compliance related element, depending on what we're doing the training on, and of course, a pending grant cycle. So questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay, I don't see any hands up. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, which is our adjournment slide. So if there aren't any other questions or comments, I am going to begin to adjourn the meeting. So, because I want to make sure that I serve up what I promised. So I know I'm going to connect with Steve and of course all of you by extension about the Buy America question that Steve verbalized, so that can help with your planning efforts. And I know Elizabeth, you had asked a question about what other organizations might also serve in a similar capacity in terms of a retirement living residential services kind of space. I know I'm not articulating that correctly, so I might use or might talk to you to make sure I'm using the right language on that. And then I know Franny, you had shared your concern about the workbook and the formulas and just making sure it represents the correct formula and the right year, all that good stuff. So we have that, and then and then I know Sunvan shared their process for the lift maintenance and using Ryder and stuff like that. So I don't know if there's anybody that wanted to connect with the folks from Sunvan, but if there is, please let me know, and I can make sure that you get connected. But are those the only 3 things that we talked about that I promised to follow up on? Those are the ones I have written down. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so if I'm not missing anything, I'm looking to see if there's a hand raised. If I'm not missing anything, we're going to go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. I do appreciate everyone's attendance. For those that participated in the survey about the best time and date for future coordination, or I'm sorry, mobility coordination working group meetings, I'm going to go ahead and revise the previous calendar to reflect your feedback. So I had sent an email about that I would do that. So be on the look for that. If you don't get a revised calendar in your inbox in the next week or so, bug me about it to make sure you don't miss out on that. This will likely be the only one that's on a Monday. So it'll probably follow the feedback model that you guys were so great to share with me. So be on the lookout for that. So with that being said, thank you so much for everyone's time today. I appreciate your investment of time, and that adjourns